Adana opened the door and the room breathed. Not a metaphor. Not the feeling of a room opening up. The room breathed, a slow, deliberate exhale, the kind that comes from something that has been sealed for a very long time and has finally been given air, and the breath that came out was warm and smelled of something she had no name for. Something old. Something that had been waiting. She stood in the doorway and did not go in. Not yet. The door had been locked for as long as she had lived in this house. 11 years. She had been 8 years old when her grandmother brought her here after her parents died in the Enugu Expressway accident, and the door at the end of the upstairs corridor had been locked on the first day she arrived and had been locked every day since, and the one time she had asked about it her grandmother had said, in the voice that did not invite follow-up questions, that it was not a room for living people. She was 8 years old. She had accepted this. She was 19 now. And her grandmother had been buried 4 days ago. And the key had been in the envelope with her name on it, left with the lawyer, with a note in her grandmother's handwriting that said only, "When you are ready." Not open this when I am gone. Not here is the key to the room. Just, when you are ready. Adana had waited 4 days. She was not certain she was ready. She opened the door anyway. If you have ever stood in front of something you were not sure you should open but opened it anyway, drop a comment below. And if you are new here, subscribe right now, because what Adana finds in this room will change everything she thought she knew about her family, her grandmother, and herself. The house in Awka had been her grandmother's for 50 years. Mama Chidinma had bought it in 1974, which was unusual for a woman in 1974 and which her grandmother had never explained to anyone's satisfaction. She had simply appeared in the neighborhood with money and papers and the specific composure of someone who has decided something and does not require anyone else's opinion of the decision. She was a healer. Not a doctor. She had no formal medical training, no certificates on walls, no stethoscope. What she had was knowledge. The kind of knowledge that does not come from textbooks but from longer and less linear sources. She knew plants. She knew when a sickness was of the body and when it was of something else, and she knew the difference mattered because the treatment differed accordingly. People came to the house in Awka from 3 states. They came early in the mornings and waited on the long bench outside the back entrance, and Mama Chidinma received them one by one and they left with things she gave them, sometimes wrapped leaves, sometimes small bottles of preparations, sometimes nothing physical, just words spoken over them in a language Adana had never fully understood, and they were, by the accounts of the people who came and the families of the people who came, helped. Adana had grown up in this house watching all of this. She had grown up helping, grinding things, fetching water, learning the names of plants she encountered in the small garden behind the house and the meanings of those names, which her grandmother taught her with the patience of someone who understood that knowledge of this kind required time to settle. She had also grown up with the locked door. It was present the way locked things are present, not constantly visible but constantly known. A fact of the house that everything else organized around. Adana had never tried the handle after the first year. She had learned to pass it without looking at it. She had learned to explain it to the few friends who visited as simply a storage room, which everyone accepted because houses have storage rooms and some storage rooms stay locked. What she had not learned to do was stop wondering. What was in there? Why it was locked? Why her grandmother's note said "when you are ready" and not simply "open this" or "here is the key." The distinction mattered. Ready implied a state that might or might not be achieved. Ready implied that the room contained something for which readiness was a prerequisite. Ready implied that her grandmother knew she would open it and had an opinion about when the opening should happen. 4 days after the burial, at 11 in the morning, with the lawyer's envelope still on the kitchen table and the house quiet in the specific way of houses that have lost the person who made them alive, Adana had taken the key and climbed the stairs. She stood in the doorway. The room breathed. She went in. It was larger than she expected. Not large, the house's floor plan did not allow for large, but larger than a room at the end of a corridor had any business been, which meant that the corridor itself was shorter than it should have been, which meant the room extended further back than the house's exterior suggested it should. She did not examine this too carefully. The room was full. Not cluttered, full in the way of a place that has been carefully organized over many years by someone who knew exactly what they had and exactly where it was. Shelves along every wall, floor to ceiling. And on the shelves, arranged with a precision that was almost architectural, books. Notebooks. Small sealed containers, clay, glass, woven, each one labeled in handwriting she recognized as her grandmother's, each label in a script she could only partially read. Bundles of dried plants hanging from a line strung across the upper portion of the room, their smell the source of the old warm scent that had come out with the room's first breath. And on the central table, a low wooden table, the only furniture in the room, a single item. A book. Large. Bound in something she chose not to examine closely. Closed, with a leather strap around it, and on the strap, another small paper, and on the paper, in her grandmother's handwriting. Asterisk for Adana. Read from the beginning asterisk. She sat on the floor in front of the table. She picked up the book. She opened it. The first page was a date. 1962. The handwriting on the first page was not her grandmother's, it was older, a different hand, the ink faded but legible. And above the date, a name. Mama Chioma Ezenwachi. Adana did not recognize the name. She read the first entry. It was a record. A careful, methodical record of a healing, a woman who had come with a sickness that the hospitals in Enugu had named and not helped, the plant preparations used, the observations over 14 days, the outcome. Written in the plain language of someone who was documenting not for an audience but for a record. She turned the page. Another record. Different patient. Different sickness. Different preparation. Same careful documentation. She turned pages. More records. Dozens. Spanning years, 1962, 1963, 1964. The handwriting consistent, the approach consistent, the outcomes documented honestly, sometimes healed, sometimes improved, sometimes not changed, and in those cases the writer had noted what had been tried and what might have been tried differently, with the intellectual honesty of someone who was learning as they went. At the bottom of the entry dated March 1967, the handwriting changed. Became her grandmother's. A single line from Mama Chidima, written in the middle of someone else's record. Asterisk Mama Chioma died this morning. I continue asterisk. Adana sat with that for a long time. Then she turned the page. Her grandmother's handwriting continued the record from that point, from 1967, in the same format, the same careful documentation, the same honesty about outcomes. The records continued for pages and pages and years until she flipped ahead, checking. They continued all the way to a date 11 months ago, 3 months before her grandmother's illness had become impossible to manage. The last entry was incomplete, it stopped mid-sentence, which she had never seen her grandmother do, and the incomplete sentence said simply, "For this one I think the preparation that Mama Chioma used in." It stopped there. Adana closed the book. She sat in the room for a long time. She went back downstairs. She made tea she did not drink. She sat at the kitchen table with the lawyer's envelope and the key and the tea, and she thought about 1962 and a woman named Mama Chioma Ezenwachi and a record that had been kept without interruption for 61 years by 2 women, one of whom had just died and one of whom was now sitting in a kitchen in Oka not entirely certain what she was supposed to do with that information. She called her friend Chioma, who was named for no one in particular as far as she knew, it was simply a common name, and told her she needed to talk. Chioma arrived in 40 minutes. She sat across from Adana at the kitchen table and looked at the key and the envelope and the tea and Adana's face. "Tell me," she said. Adana told her. "The room. The book. The records. The two names. The 61 years. Chioma was quiet for a moment. So your grandmother was, what? A healer who kept patient records. Yes. But, Adana stopped. Chioma, this woman, Mama Chioma Ezenwachi, started those records in 1962. My grandmother continued them from 1967. That is not just record keeping. It is a practice being passed from one woman to another. A specific practice. A specific knowledge. And your grandmother left you the key. When I am ready. What does ready mean? I don't know yet. Chioma looked at her carefully. What do you want it to mean? Adana thought about it. I want it to mean that whatever this was, what Mama Chioma started and my grandmother continued, I am the next one. She paused. I want it to mean that the room is mine now and the knowledge in it is mine now and the work is mine now. That is a large thing to want, Chioma said. I know. You are 19. I know that too. Chioma looked at the key on the table. Are you afraid? Of which part? Any of it. Adana thought about the room breathing when she opened it. The warm old smell. The book in her hands. The specific weight of 61 years of someone's careful work. No, she said. And then, more honestly, I am afraid of not being enough for it. That is different from being afraid of it. Chioma nodded slowly. What are you going to do? Go back upstairs, Adana said. And read from the beginning. Like she said. She read for 3 days. She did not read continuously, she slept, she ate, she answered the phone when the relatives who had not yet called to offer condolences that were genuine and condolences that were about the house and condolences she could not always tell the difference between. But every available hour she was in the room on the floor in front of the low table with the book. She read Mama Chioma's records first. All of them, from 1962 to 1967. She read them with the attention of someone trying to understand not just what was being done but how the thinking behind it worked. She read about plants she recognized from her grandmother's garden and plants she did not recognize and preparations she had watched her grandmother make in the kitchen and preparations she had not known existed. She read about a philosophy that was embedded in the records without being stated directly, the philosophy of someone who believed that the body's sickness and the person's situation and the world around the person were not separate systems but one continuous thing, and that healing any part of them required understanding all of them. It was not mystical. It was not primitive. It was more sophisticated than she had expected and more humane than the medical system she had been taught to respect and which had not, in her parents' case, been sufficient. She read her grandmother's records from 1967 onward. The voice was different from Mama Chioma's but the approach was the same format, same honesty, same philosophical orientation. Her grandmother had added things, observations about plants that Mama Chioma had not used, preparations she had developed herself, notes in the margins where she disagreed with something from an earlier entry and said why. She had also, beginning in approximately 1985, added a different kind of note. At the end of certain entries, in smaller handwriting, were reflections. Not about the patient. About the practice itself. About the difficulty of doing work that was not understood by the world she was doing it in. About the loneliness of being a certain kind of knower in a time that did not know how to hold that kind of knowing. About her daughter, Adana's mother, who had not wanted this, who had gone to university and become an accountant and built a life in the city and who had been, her grandmother wrote with love and without bitterness, the kind of person who needed a different kind of life. About Adana. Adana found the entry about herself on the second day of reading. It was dated 6 years ago, she had been 13. Asterisk she came with me to the garden this morning and named every plant before I told her. Everyone. I have been watching her for 5 years. I have been watching her the way Mama Chioma watched me. I think I know what I am looking at. I will not tell her yet. She needs to come to it herself. These things cannot be given. They can only be recognized. Adana sat on the floor of the room and held the book and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not from grief only, though grief was present. From the particular emotion of being seen. Of having been seen, carefully and over a long time, by someone who is no longer there to be told that you were seen. She cried until she was finished. Then she wiped her face. Then she kept reading. On the third day she found the second book. She had been looking at the shelves more carefully, reading the labels on the sealed containers, identifying some of the plants from their dried hanging forms, and on the lowest shelf, behind a stack of older notebooks, she found a second bound book, smaller than the first, and on the cover, in her grandmother's handwriting. What I know that I have not written elsewhere. She took it to the table. She opened it. This book was different. It was not records. It was knowledge, direct, organized, written as if being addressed to someone. Organized into sections. Plants and their properties and the conditions under which their properties changed. Preparations and the specific sequence and timing that made them effective versus ineffective. Observations about patterns in the people who came, the way certain kinds of sickness clustered in certain kinds of circumstances, the way the body expressed things the person could not or would not say. And at the beginning, before the sections, a short introduction. If you are reading this, you are Adana and you have been ready for longer than you knew. This is everything I know. Learn it slowly. Question it. Add to it. The book before this one spans 61 years. I expect yours to be longer. The plants in the garden are yours. The room is yours. The people who come will find you. They always find the one who is ready. She read the introduction 4 times. Then she went to the window. The garden below was small and overgrown at the edges, her grandmother's hands having been absent from it for the months of illness. The plants were there, most of them still alive, some needing attention, some needing the kind of specific care she now knew the names of because she had spent 3 days reading. She looked at the garden for a long time. She called the lawyer on the 4th day. She had questions about the house, which she now knew was hers. Her grandmother's will had been straightforward on this point. She had questions about the property and the taxes and the practical arrangements of being 19 years old and the owner of a house in Oka. The lawyer, a patient man named Mr. Obi, answered all of them. At the end of the call he said, "Your grandmother spoke of you often." Adana said, "What did she say?" "She said you were the most quietly certain person she had ever met." He paused. "She said certainty that doesn't announce itself is the most reliable kind." Adana was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Mr. Obi," she said. She hung up. She went upstairs. She went into the room. She sat at the low table and she opened the second book at the first section and she began to read with the attention of someone who is not studying for an exam but building a foundation, slowly, carefully, understanding that what she was reading had taken 61 years to accumulate and would take her own lifetime to fully learn and then add to for whoever came after her. She read. 3 weeks after opening the door, the first person came. She had not advertised. She had not told anyone except Chioma about the room or its contents. She had simply been in the house, learning, tending the garden with the knowledge she was acquiring, living in the quiet of a house that was becoming hers in a deeper way than ownership. The woman was at the back door at 7 in the morning. She was perhaps 60. She had come from Onitsha, 2 hours by bus. She had found out, she said, from a woman who had found out from another woman who had found out from someone whose daughter had been helped years ago. She had a sickness that the hospital had named and was managing but not helping, and she had been told that the woman in the house in Oka sometimes helped with what hospitals managed but did not help. She said the woman in the house. Not Mama Chidima. The woman in the house. Adana stood at the back door and looked at this woman who had come 2 hours on a bus to find help, and she felt the weight of what she was and was not yet, and she felt the weight of the second book with its 61 years of accumulated knowledge, and she felt the weight of her grandmother's handwriting saying the people who come will find you. Come in, she said. You are young, the woman said. It was not an objection. It was an observation. Yes, Adana said. Your grandmother. She taught me, Adana said. Come in. Tell me everything. The woman came in. Adana listened with the full attention she had been watching her grandmother give to people since she was 8 years old, the attention that treated what a person was saying as the most important information available, which it usually was. She did not pretend to know more than she knew. When she was uncertain, she said she was uncertain. When she needed to check the book, she checked the book without embarrassment. When she needed to look at the garden, she looked at the garden with the woman beside her, explaining what she was looking for. The woman watched all of this. At the end she said, "You are not like I expected." What did you expect? I don't know exactly. More performance. The ones who know things sometimes perform the knowing. My grandmother didn't, Adana said. No, the woman said. She did not. She took what Adana prepared for her. She thanked her at the door. She left. Adana stood at the back door after she left and felt something she had no precise name for, the particular feeling of having been exactly where you were supposed to be, doing exactly what you were supposed to be doing, for the first time in a long time. She went upstairs. She opened the book. She turned to a fresh page at the back. She wrote the date. She wrote the woman's name and her sickness and what had been prepared and why and what the expected outcome was and how she would know if it was working. She wrote the entry the way she had read entries written for 61 years, carefully, honestly, with the intellectual humility of someone who was learning as they went. She finished the entry. She looked at the page. Then, below the entry, in smaller handwriting, she wrote something her grandmother had not written in the records but had written in the reflective notes at the end of certain entries, and which Adana understood now was also part of the practice. Asterisk, I was afraid of not being enough for this. I am still afraid. But she came and I listened and I tried and I wrote it down. Mama Chidima wrote in 1967 that she continued. I am also continuing. That is what this is. One person continuing after another. For as long as it is needed, asterisk. She closed the book. She went downstairs. She made tea. She drank it. Some doors are locked not because of what they keep out but because of what they keep ready. Her grandmother had locked that room for 50 years not to hide it but to hold it. To hold the knowledge inside it at the right temperature, in the right conditions, until the person who was meant to receive it was ready to receive it. Adana had been watched for 6 years. She had been seen for 6 years. And on the 4th day after her grandmother's burial, at 11 in the morning, she had opened a door and a room had breathed and everything that was meant for her had been there, exactly where it had been kept, waiting. Some things cannot be given. They can only be recognized. Adana recognized hers. And she continued. If this story moved you or reminded you of something a grandmother or elder passed down to you, share it right now. Drop a comment and tell us what was in your family's locked room, the knowledge, the gift, the thing that was being kept for you. Like this video so more people find this story. And if you are not yet subscribed, do it now, because every week we bring you a story that opens a door into something you were not expecting. The next one is already waiting. Do not miss it.